Hey everyone, David Young here. Welcome to another episode of the Career Tech Leaders Show. On episode 2 today, I'm talking to Steve Fisk. He is the superintendent of Odessa, Washington schools. And in this episode, we talk about what it's like to run career tech programs in more of a rural environment. Out in Odessa, it's pretty sparsely populated, a big ag community. So he talks about what they focus on, how they connect their students with learning opportunities, work-based learning, what they focus on from a career preparation standpoint, what kind of students go off to college, what percentages, where they get their funding from, all sorts of different things in helping students prepare for what's next after high school, especially as it relates to technology and different things that they're going to need to know to be successful in their careers and in their lives. So I hope you enjoy this episode with Steve. If you do like this show, I would love it if you went to Apple Podcasts or somewhere else and leave us an honest review. For that, as a thank you, I'm happy to send you a Drone Launch Learning or a Career Tech Leader Show shirt. Just screenshot your review, email it to me, david@dronelaunchlearning.com, and we'll get you out a free shirt as a thank you. Just make sure it's honest. Even if you hate it, you can give it 1 star. We just want to let more people know about the podcast, and reviews are the best way to do that. All right, with no further ado, let's get into our convo with Steve. Welcome to episode 2 of Career Tech Leader Show, or as Steve just called it right before I hit record, CTLS.
That's right.
Thanks for being here, Steve.
Thanks for having us and talking about a really great topic.
Why don't you give a little introduction just about yourself?
Sure.
What you do, who you are.
My name is Steve Fisk. I'm a superintendent in Odessa, Washington, which on the map, we're kind of in the geographic center. We have about 205 students, kindergarten through 12th grade. We have a small preschool. We are primarily known for traditionally being a really ingrained small community, multi-generational farms, multi-generational families. And you'd probably get the feeling that time hasn't really totally shifted. And that's okay, because on a Sunday when you're on Main Street, I can tell you it probably looks and feels a little bit like the 1950s. It does. There's a charm to it. There really is.
Yeah. With you being a small community, I mean, the topic of the podcast is career tech. Now, I know you're superintendent, so you don't only deal with CTEs, deal with things school-wide, or all of education.
Sure.
But in thinking specifically about students and careers, for the students that are, graduating from Odessa, are they typically sticking around, doing the local economy? Do they go off other places? Like how does that normally look?
For example, last year's graduating class, about 94% went off to college. But what we're seeing is that they do eventually come back, whether it's 10 years, 15 years. Generally, it's with kids, right? And as you grow and change, you kind of learn that maybe that small town environment is what you want for your kids. So the population has grown at about 1.5% per year, and the average age here is 58. So it's demographically telling us a story about a typical story in small town America. But the typical graduate here, if you don't leave Odessa and you don't go get some training, and you put your finger right on it, David, for me, I wanted to find a way for kids who stayed here that were not relegated to Napa, the grocery store. You get what I'm saying? There is a small hospital here. And what I'm not saying is that those in any way are bad jobs. Those are jobs. We've all had different jobs. But what I wanted to do was see if there was a place in the market for kids, particularly young women. They are not so prominent in agriculture. And frankly, if we're not careful, they'll be an extinct species in about 2 decades in the farming industry. My why was trying to find a way that our kids could engage technology in a way that our kids could continue to enjoy a rural lifestyle, and our kids could continue to find maybe a niche in the marketplace that they could make a legitimate living and a family wage where you can own a home and do some other things with that. And drone technology was just something that kind of happened. It was circumstantial, and it was on a drive home that I discovered that. And I grew up in a small town in Montana. It was mostly cattle and hay. And if you didn't go off to college, you were going to be working with cattle and hay. That was kind of your option. I was driving home and stopped at one of my board members' homes, and she's a large farmer, And it was in her, I call it her war room, but it's where they run the operation from. And on two big giant computer screens were these little John Deere tractors that were moving on the screen. And I thought it might have been one of those video games that they have. And I was like, Carmen, what is this? And she said, well, those are tractors right now, and they're working our fields. And here's what this little graph is telling us. And it was talking about fuel consumption and productivity and speed and all these other things in the type of crop. And it was like, what? I had no idea that this was available. So of course you ask questions. What is this? Where you get this? And then you learn about John Deere Essentials and Trimble technology. And you go, okay. And then you get to wondering again. And coincidentally, that same night when I got to my house, I was watching a video on drones, and it was agricultural applications. And then I got to wondering, why aren't our kids learning about this in our own school in the middle of the most productive wheat country in Washington State? And we're not talking about this. I was like, we're game on. We're going to go game. Yeah.
That's awesome. So for those of you who don't know, Steve, they implemented a drone program right this year at Odessa.
Yeah.
Since you are smaller, right, rural, when you're thinking about like CTE, do you guys have like a typical CTE department and all that stuff? What does it look like for you in terms of what other people would think of when they say like CTE pathways?
For us in Odessa, we call it the egg shop, and it's just down the street. And we have a host of different kinds of classes. You see some of the classics like small engine construction, where you build your own engine and then get it running, which is really cool, all the way to horticulture, right? Plant production, soil. You have a very active FFA program. So for those of us in really any community, but particularly small communities, it will look very traditional. The part that isn't traditional is this technological strand, this use of drones. And I think we only see, or at least I only saw the use of drones in entertainment, or you see them flying over stuff, and they might make a neat, cool video for Nat Geo. Here I am looking at this video from China, and it was a fleet of drones. It was about 40 of them. They're all taking off at the same time. I'm like, well, how does that work? Right? You just go, well, are we doing that here? And sure enough, we have Odessa Trading Company, been a great partner for us in town and has a drone program, but they're still in their infancy. Even in the industry, this is the best launch point to get our kids involved in. So I sent an email out to all the neighboring superintendents. So we have quite a few small towns in our area, about 7, sent an email off and said, hey, anybody interested in partnering on this big idea? And the big idea was this: to create a CTE-based, drone-based class looking at John Deere Essential and Trimble technology, all automated. And one said yes, and that was Jay Tyus, who you'll be talking to at another time. And
yeah, I think he's our next episode.
Yeah, so I was like, okay, what are you thinking? We met and brainstormed and sat together and I told him my story and my spark point, and said, here's a way that we can get access to women in agriculture. Second, we can use the very best of technology. We just have to grow it and grow the idea. And so we started writing for grants and got our first grant last year and purchased our first drones, and then went to Drone Launch Learning, which Jay had been doing the research on that. And that's a whole other animal out there, is what curriculum do you use and how self-guided is it? Because Jay and I are taking both different approaches. And ultimately, my target audience will be younger kids who don't have families that farm, but they want to live that rural lifestyle. Again, that's that connection back to, if you don't own a large farm, how are you going to make a living? Oh, you can go out and do, farmhand work, but I want them to think maybe a few steps higher. And so that's the drone program. Yep.
Well, that's great. I mean, and in the world of drones for the last 10 years or so, it's been interesting to see how that's developed in terms of specifically use in agriculture. I think a lot of people thought at the very beginning, I say that at the beginning, 2015 to 2018, thought drones was going to be like in use in agriculture everywhere, but it took a little bit to catch on, like adoption wise, for people to, say like, this makes economic sense to do this. Because especially like the sprayer drones, if you're doing, application chemicals, those things are not cheap. Those sprayer drones are tens of thousands of dollars typically. There's a lot of paperwork that goes along with doing that. It's just like any crop dusting type stuff. It's really interesting. That has definitely picked up. There is a guy I talked to. He's in Virginia, other side of the country from you, but his whole operation is ag drones. He does a lot of like Christmas tree farm spraying, things like that. So it's really interesting to see how that's picked up in recent years.
In 2019, the generated revenue from drone use was 1.4 billion. By 2024, it was 4.8 billion. And then it is expected to double again within that next 4-year strand. So we know this is a growing industry. Funny thing, David, you bring up a topic that nobody seems to know about this. Like, they don't know that this exists even here. It's sort of like a good kept secret that this is out there. And it's so juxtaposed against the pastoral view of farming, right?
Yeah. Well, it's different because it's new, but it's just a tool like anything else. People are using tractors instead of hand tools, and now they're going to be using drones, and maybe not to replace crop dust, but in certain applications, it makes more sense to use sprayer drones. And then especially on like crop health monitoring, you can do a lot of really cool stuff there with different sensors. So it's very interesting in the ag space for sure. So it sounds like you all focus primarily on ag, and that sounds like because that's or a big part of your local economy.
Correct. Correct.
Is that what you all just stay focused on that, or is any others?
No, we want to diversify a little bit because there's some work you can do in natural resources with it. Obviously, we know in construction, and then that all synthesizes. Drone Launch Learning just finished their mapping course, right? And as you know, mapping's where it's at. And that's where it just opens up an entire other threshold of information and learning. And let's just say it, the data potential from drone opens up a whole other challenge, right? Which is with precision tech, drone tech, it produces all this data. How do you manage the data? How do you understand the data? And then how do you apply it for efficiency, right? It's really what it's trying to get to is grain right now is priced in the mid 1980s, right? It's probably $5.19 a bushel. And we know that diesel is about $4.59 here right now per gallon. The balance between the two is pretty tricky. Drone use here is still kind of coming forward, but we're seeing more and more use it for mapping particularly. And then that gets dropped into Weed It, right? Your Weed It technology, which is a Trimble product.
I'm not familiar with that. Tell me about
it. So Weed It, yeah, that's pretty fascinating. It's about a 40-foot boom, okay? The simple idea is that you're applying chemical to weeds. That's what you're doing.
Oh, okay.
But the difference is that I take that map that I just made of that circle or that crop, and it's going to selectively pick out, however I map it, where the weeds are. And then that gets dropped into your Weed It in your tractor, okay? And as you drive, it is selectively spraying just the weeds. It's not 100% coverage, right? That's cool.
Yeah, that's really cool.
And that was another thing I didn't know about. I was like, what? Because you did spray everything, right? That's what we do.
Yeah. When you say you take a map, it's like, are you taking a drone map data, or is it a different map? Okay. So you're collecting all that. For those of you not familiar with drone mapping, essentially drones can fly an automated path, take tons and tons and tons of pictures of that, and then a software stitches them all together for, think of just like one giant master photo that's super high resolution. Yep. That's awesome. And it's all geo-referenced, so it knows where it is on the world. So
yeah, these are colors. So these are tracking it by color. So the specific color of the weed, now it's a little bit easier when the ground is fallow. They're not messing with it, or we're kind of earlier in the season. But that application still works because some of the mapping technology now has the shape of the leaf. It will pick it out. And so it will sort. If you can imagine acres and acres and acres of a circle, right? And it's going to pick out those specific leaf patterns on that weed, and it's going to sort it. Oh,
that's really, really cool.
It kind of blows your mind, actually.
Yeah. Well, it almost reminds me, I've seen, this is not anything to do with drones or anything, but I've seen, they do these slow-mo videos where, I don't know if it's like a picker or something, but it picks all different types of, let's say, fruit, and it's sifting them through in these little arms and like hit out the bad ones because it sees it like so quickly and just automatically sorting, boom, 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 knock them out.
It's exactly it. And let's go again back to just our demographics, right? The reason we need young people doing this is that the average 58-year-old who's farming isn't going to necessarily pick up this tech so easy.
Yeah.
They're not.
Yeah.
So there is a ready-made market.
Yeah. No, that's really, really cool. I'm curious, shifting gears just a bit.
Yeah.
What for teachers coming from a smaller average population,
Right.
where do you find your teachers from? And is it hard to recruit? And how does that work?
A lot of them are homegrown. A lot of them go off to school and return. But the answer to your question is, yeah, it is difficult. How far do you really want to live from a grocery store? Or how far do you want to live from the next maybe small town? Or, I don't know how people scale things anymore. I've lived in larger urban areas and really small places. And it's hard to attract people, particularly to rural America, because the opportunities are different, right? But there's some also other opportunities that are greater, right? So in our case, Haley Walter, our egg teacher, grew up in actually suburbia, then moved out here and became rural. And then she self-trained and found her own pathway into our egg program. And so we had to use, and you can use alternative certification. She still had to take the coursework. She still had to learn by doing. She still had to do all the practical applications, but it looked different than what we would say as a traditional egg teacher. And a lot of the kids, at least 3 I know of, after we just finished our FFA interviews this last week, would like to teach egg science, right? And then they would like to run their own small farm. It's kind of their big dream in the world, is to have a little bit of both, right? And share their passion for agriculture.
Yeah, that's great. With your ag program, obviously, we've talked about drones and offering that for your students to get
Sure.
certified and also learn the mapping. What are some of the other ag courses that you have, for the students?
Yeah, so right now we're getting ready to kick up the greenhouse and get the hort side of it going, and along with the soil side. And that'll, eventually leads down the road to a pretty large plant sale that the kids will have that they host. So they cultivate, from seed, all the plants, and then grow them in the greenhouse. And so they learn that whole process. They learn about fertilizers. It's on a micro scale, obviously. Sure. But the same application and think set is applied. Then we do segments of build, so you build your own engine, and then you get that engine running. I don't know a lot, but I know that that's not easy. They started their units earlier on this semester, and the kids just finished putting together their first engine and getting it running. They do some traditional wood shop work. They also do some very traditional egg business applications as well.
Okay.
And then obviously that all feeds into our FFA strand program.
Now, I'm curious for the engines, just personal curiosity. I wish I knew how to work on engines when I was in high school, because later on I got this rinky-dink John boat, 2-stroke motor, and stopped working. I had no idea what I was doing. I had to call my friend, like, "Can you come fix this thing for me?" But what are they? Are they just buying old tractor motors and working on them, or where do you guys get that stuff?
So this is a company called Case, CASE, and we get it confused with Case, the tractor company. But this Case company its mission is to provide nationally really great curriculum that is hands-on in nature, and it is to serve the agricultural industry. So what they send you is literally a box of an engine. And there's an engine in there, but it's not put together.
Oh, so you just get all the components.
Yeah. And then you start from scratch. You start, okay, what are the parts of an engine? What does that engine look like, right? And then you learn about its function, operation, and then you start to take each of those parts as you've learned about them or assemble them in a functioning, working engine. It's absolutely amazing for the kids. I think that's probably one of the really more important skills, because that kind of problem solving, just kind of think about that, translates across to multiple genres in that kind of work. But I always just find it impressive, because most people drive their car to a lot. It might say Subaru, it might say Lexus, it might say Chevy, and leave it, walk away, and they come back an hour later and it magically works. So that's the cool part. And I think the kids are learning those practical pieces of maintenance, care, upkeep, and then they can problem solve if they need to repair things.
Yeah, that's cool. Seems like the majority of students will go off to college. Are they staying in the state, or I don't know if you have that info. I'm just curious what
generally our kids are staying in state. We live near Spokane, Washington, which is probably one of our larger major urban hubs. And then To the west of us is Seattle and the greater Seattle area.
When they're going off to college, do you know what kind of things they're doing and what kind of careers they end up getting into?
Yeah, they kind of strand out in all areas, but obviously agriculture is one. And then there's this really interesting phenomenon here. We find quite a few that go into accounting. And then we've seen others that do go into education and then also the medical sciences. We have a very good science program here.
Do you have a lot of or many people that do, you mentioned they go away to college and then they come back. Do you have many people doing like remote work because they want to live in like the town, but they work for other companies? When you mentioned accounting, I was an accountant and my accountant is remote. And I know that's a job you can often do from anywhere. I just didn't know if you had a lot of that, people moving back doing remote jobs, or are they pretty much all plugged in locally?
Yeah, they're plugged in locally. They've got boots on the ground. You bring up an interesting point of just connectivity. Out in some of these rural areas can be somewhat challenging, although Starlink has been a pretty big game changer for both agriculture and I think just the living that you can do now off grid. And we have a few that do that. Yes.
Okay, cool. I was just curious. Let's talk about funding for a little bit. You mentioned you got a grant to do some of your programs.
Yeah.
Was it hard to find, or just kind of?
It was a lot of work. So it started first, our first seed money came from a group called the Hagen Foundation, and that's a foundation located out of Spokane, Washington. And again, they want to fund non-traditional looks at educational opportunities for kids. So it was this kind of a twist on it, although we're applying to a granting agency in a predominantly suburban urban area. This one, again, kind of played with their mind because they were like drone agriculture, precision ag, Trimble, John Deere Essentials. What are they talking about, right? So once we were able to formulate the big idea for them, there's been no problem securing funds through grants. And then on the other side, you get involved with Carl Perkins. And that's just frankly a ton of work to get the money. But that opens other doors to get improved technology where you can take your weed system and you can take your John Deere Essentials and your Trimble and you can put it on a side-by-side. And then you can do applications of the very same technology that you'd be using in one of your large Case or John Deere tractors or combines, right? And so getting those kids the rep and hours with that is pretty critical.
If you were going to give advice to other people who are, like they want to start some cool new career program, they're out there looking for money, like what approach did you take? Did you already know about this?
Well, first you go online and you just type in grants for agricultural education. You're going to see a bunch that pop up. You will. But it's good to kind of start with local industry. We had the Odessa Trading Company sponsored a simulator, a Trimble simulator. It would look to us like maybe what we'd experienced when we were practicing for driver's ed and everybody went to the trailers. I don't know if people remember. I'm really dating myself now. You'd go report to the trailer and everybody had their own seat. There'd be a video screen, right? So it's very similar, but it gives you the same console, same view as you would get out of your tractor. And you program it exactly the same way, setting your boundaries and speeds and those kind of things. My other bit of advice is, talk to people. I didn't know a lot, but what I did know is that we didn't do anything with it. So that was the first question I had was, why are we not doing that? And then once you plant that seed, then the kids have to understand, did you know, and have you ever, and that's where it started organically and then bumped into the Hagen Foundation about 2 weeks after Jay and I had been kicking that can around. That popped up and it just seemed like a real natural fit. We got funding for year 2 of our project. We sponsored a larger, what we called Precision Agriculture Day for all our communities around us to invite the kids in, the teachers, to just learn about the basics of precision ag, run a backhoe, learn about a combine, run a tractor, right? And then run a side-by-side and program it. And so we took really those basic steps, and then we did drone application down at our football field. And then everybody had lunch, and industry, business partners, producers, kids, kind of all in the same environment, right? Interacting is not only just really cool, it's really appropriate too. Yeah. Because those are the seeds we want to plant. Yep.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned you had the idea or saw, hey, I think we need to do this, cool thing with precision ag and drones. Is it the case that you have to sort of sell it to the students to get them to want to do? Is this like they have to opt into it, or you're just like, hey, if you go to Odessa, this is an ag place, and this is what you're learning no matter what?
No, this was one of those where I put the word out with the kids and I explained, here's the benefit. So our program's a little bit different than Jay's because I didn't have the same staffing capacity. And that's why drone launch learning was so helpful for me, is that I was able to recruit 8 kids, 6 young women, 2 young men, and they're following through with the course sequence. They're doing independent study. They'll be doing their fly time in the spring. So we got them each mini drones so they can practice at home and just start to get a feel for it. And if they will complete the course sequence, we'll pay for them to get their F-107 drone pilot's license.
Okay, cool.
Right?
That's maybe another good topic is like how you are, what mode of delivery you have. So for you, are you doing this almost as like a little bit of a at-home independent study thing for this? Or
Absolutely. Yeah. And I wanted to test those waters because you already identified it. You may at different times have staffing capacity challenges. So it means I get to take the class too. Now, it wasn't that I woke up one day and said, oh, I want to fly drones. That wasn't it. But what I have learned is that you can learn it. You can learn and apply anything. And for me, I thought it was probably as good to practice what you preach, right? And so I think for the kids, they get the big vision, which is they want to live in a community like this and they want to raise a family in a community like this. But maybe their brains aren't thinking, well, how do I make a living here? They're not thinking that right now, but they surely will be when they're 20, 21 and go, oh, yeah, hello, right?
Yeah.
And so that part's been an easy sell. I think the other part that has been really kind of magical is that, young women in agriculture, in technology, kind of hit some strands that aren't often hit in our schools in the US. And so it seems to be a really natural fit here that we're trying to take the non-agricultural producer and the kid who maybe doesn't have access to a farm and flip that script, knowing very well that if they decide to move to Spokane and they got their drone pilot's license, they can apply that in real estate, construction, entertainment, news, all sorts of different components, aspects, and make a good living. Yep.
Yeah. And one of the nice things you were saying too, precision agriculture with its, GIS connection with all the, GPS receivers and what they do for precision agriculture, applies really closely to a lot of civil engineering stuff and construction. Because they're doing the same thing. They're grading land and they're doing it by flying drones over, getting the map, taking that, loading it into their systems, using Trimble receivers, and they'll use that to control the blade to grade land. So it's very translatable into other fields too.
It's so interesting you say that. I met a farmer, okay, and she is a relative of one of my board members. He is, and he was just doing the farming thing, and he learned all of the precision ag stuff. Well, he needed to develop part of his property. So he took the same applications and applied them to construction. Well, now he has a farm and a construction company. I was like, oh, hello.
Yeah. I know you all are using it primarily with precision ag. I thought you were applying the drones, but it is interesting to see as I looked at, many, many different states, where their departments of education place that drone credential, because it's in they use the mapping. They'll use it in public safety to do a crime scene or accident scene reconstruction. Use it in energy to, help out with looking at power lines and pole placement.
Right.
It's hard to know where to stick it because it kind of goes, other than cosmetology or nursing, healthcare, obviously it's not going to do those, but there are so many other ones where it could fit. So it's just interesting to see where the different states put it all.
And that's what we talk, we talk a lot about that with the kids is that this is a use of this knowledge, right? And we don't know where this is going to evolve. We haven't gotten to the application of AI, although we use AI in prescription writing, right? And you're trying to identify what it is you're trying to select in your mapping program. I think that's the other part that's attractive. In natural resources, it's seed bombing areas to restore natural habitat because you can't get real people in there because it's too steep, right? Yep. Or you've got people using it for fish counts. You've got people looking at sandbars, right, on the Columbia and how they shift and move. It's out there and it's kind of everywhere, but we just don't seem to know about it. That's the funny part. It's like, what?
Well, It's like the technology comes out and you got some early adopters and everybody's figuring it out, and eventually it makes its way into, more widespread enterprise adoption. So I feel like we're kind of coming into that phase.
Absolutely. And I feel like, our timing is pretty perfect. So, the more challenging part hasn't been getting kids interested here. It's how do we plant that seed in each one of our respective communities? Because at a state level, we still don't have an FFA or even a drone competition. And we want to, kind of put that front and center. And how do we start to build curriculum across 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 rural remote communities to start to build a cadre of kids that are trained, understand it, can go work in industry if they want to go work for John Deere, if they want to go work for Case, if they want to work in their local economy right off the bat, they will be able to. And so that's the part we're still trying to plant the seed. And that technology can be kind of intimidating for folks too, and expensive. It's just to say it. So
Yeah. Well, you can start cheap, right? Those, like little drones, you can get those for like $30, but
that's exactly what we did. Yeah.
yeah, if you're gonna get sprayer drones, I've seen those sell for 40 grand or, depending on what size you get. So
we're working on that. We're working on that. Yes.
oh, that's cool. That's good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Speaking of technology, maybe shifting gears a little bit, we've talked about drones, but when you think about, I want to prepare my students for careers that are out there, maybe they're locally or other places.
Sure.
What do you see as important just in career learning or technology specifically that's coming down the road that you might be thinking about in future years for installing in your school?
What I would envision like 10 years from now would be our own company of students that follow a sequence of course learnings with obviously the synthesis of it where you apply data learning, drone use, chemical application, weed feeding, maybe some side work with a construction company. But the biggest synthesis of it for me would be a company comprised of kids where the revenue that they generate from it goes back into that same program, whether it is to compensate or to continue to upgrade your technology. But then you're taking a look at every aspect of the work industry, and it's led by kids. And, I don't think we always have the highest expectations for kids, and we should, because they're capable of anything.
Yeah.
Right? And I think sometimes we talk about technology in a really negative light. We do. You say, they're sitting there playing their video games and they're doing this and they're doing that. Well, get your hands on a drone controller sometime and that'll tell you exactly what you're playing with. And then you go, oh, this is a transposable skill. It is.
Yeah. Yeah.
For some of my kids who don't naturally attract into some of those things, you put that controller in their hand, they are right at home, right? And they're like, oh yeah, this is cool. And then they get that thing up 150 feet and they're looking at the camera view and they're like, this is awesome. You hope nobody gets in trouble because we don't, can't maybe do that. But out here, it's a little bit safer to do that out here.
Yeah, as I say, if you're pretty rural, then you're probably
we're okay. We're okay. So that's really our hope is that, and then we continue to evolve with the industry and with the application. We don't know yet what those are going to be.
Yeah.
But it's
I love
growing.
that idea of I love the idea of the self-sustaining, like, they're able to do work, get actual real experience and help fund, what they're doing to keep the program alive.
And Dylan, think about the cost to the small farmer, right? The small farmer doesn't always attract to some of the precision ag stuff because it is expensive. And so if we can do that for some of our smaller producers that maybe don't have the resource to do all of that, but we can come in and fill some of those gaps for them and still get that resource to keep within our program and keep recirculating that is also an attractive thought.
Yeah, that's awesome. Like serving the community while getting them experience while generating a little income.
Absolutely.
On those lines, do you have anything now where any like sort of work-based learning or apprenticeships or,
They do. Yeah. So we have work-based learning opportunities with the Odessa Trading Company. And so this is our Case Trimble group. And then we'll do those. And then we have some with the Grange, and the Grange is another farm producer application. And then within our granaries as well. So I think that, again, we want to take as many aspects of the industry and synthesize those in a way that just makes sense And right now the physical plant that's required for what we're doing right now, it's pretty simple. I lean down and I'm looking at my $5,000 drones that we purchased with our grant, and they're pretty cool. Those are neat. And the kids get those in their hands and they're like, "Ooh, okay, hello." And that's really been quite fun for them. And I think the other piece is how do Jay and I continue to model a partnership economically? In other words, taking different learning applications of the same work, and then how do we take the resources we have and spread them out, not only between our two schools, but how do we then share that resource? Because I want to provide this to all schools in our area for free. All you got to do is show some interest, be motivated, and learn. That's as simple. It's simple.
Yeah, that's awesome. You mentioned that you had some nicer $5,000 drones. Which drones did you end up getting?
I purchased it with a company out of Florida. So this is Ockel Robotics.
Okay.
So these are the ones that, obviously, we can you got the camera up front. So now, and then, there's a lot of free applications for mapping tech. Now that can get super sophisticated and can get a little bit expensive actually. So what we're hoping to do is maybe get a company to sponsor us is what the hope is. Yeah. I mean, it's a pretty simple, basic idea. And we needed it to get, some elevation safely, and that it would transpose itself on the F-107 side. So if we put the kid to work, that when they get their hands on the big boys, and then they're big.
Yeah.
All those really big ones are pretty interesting, actually.
Like the sprayer ones or something?
Yeah. And the fun thing about those is how programmable they are. And then once you program them and you watch a really good drone expert, I'll just fly that pattern.
Yeah.
Ooh,
Yeah.
back and forth.
The nice thing about drones is whether you're the little toy ones you bought, and then that $5,000 one, and then the super expensive one, the thumb controls are all the same, so the kids learn how to fly.
For a lot of people, these little baby drones are just kind of fun. I mean, they just really are fun. And then look at this thing. Come on.
It's at the Holy Stone one night. Yeah.
Boom, baby. You get 10 of those whipping around the gym at the same time. It's one of those that's affordable, right? You can send with a kid and they could take it home and you're not out a significant resource, and it gets their hands on it, right?
Yeah.
And then when you give them the big boys, well, this isn't a big boy, but it's expensive.
Well, it's expensive. Yeah, I heard a school. I was talking to a school in Alabama, and they said, "Yeah, well, we got a grant for like $10,000, and we bought a bunch. We bought 10 or 8, $1,000 or $1,200 drones.
Right.
Gave those to the kids as their first drone, and we have 2 left because they wrecked them all." Oh no!
No,
You gotta. I think your strategy is good of giving them the cheap ones first to learn on, and then.
I think that sort of made sense. It's like, give him the 61 Chevelle, right? Ready. No, I don't think so. No, you want to put him in the golf cart first. Then they learn how to just keep it in between the lines.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Well, Steve, I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but do you have any parting words to those listening if they're thinking about, hey, I want to start up some new programs on my school, whether it's drones or precision ag or,
I think if it's absolutely anything, really think outside of the box, but think within that box. And the box is, how can you help support your kids in developing a career, keeping them engaged, and don't be afraid to dream and dig in. My background, while I grew up in a small town and I grew up in a farming and ranching community, my heart is always centered around how do we build the very best future for kids? And part of that is giving them something worthwhile, real, growth-oriented to do. My attraction has always been trying to find those underserved in the marketplace, a place in the marketplace. That's going to grow those futures. That's our why. And it's just fun to push the envelope to see how far we really get to go in this idea of education. It can look a lot of different ways. It doesn't always have to look the same way. And that's the other piece I like about those, is that we can do it however we want, and the circumstance requires it. It's not optional. Yep.
I love it. Well, thanks so much for your time, Steve. Appreciate it. Great having you on.
You bet. Be safe, be well.